You are about to watch Scott Edinger deliver a keynote address for a transportation services client to an international audience of 200 people. This is an example of the degree to which Scott customizes his powerful and entertaining presentations for specific client events. His consulting work for Fortune 1000 organizations and his writing for the Harvard Business Review and Forbes, including dozens of articles, permit him to schedule only 35 keynotes per year. This program was recorded as delivered with no dubbing and no nonsense.
Thanks for that nice introduction. I'll tell you that story another time. I grew up on the east coast of Florida, close to a beach, but I never learned how to swim. And then one day, somewhere between early onset of a midlife crisis and a bet with a friend, I agreed that I'd do a triathlon. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with a triathlon, that's when you take the really enjoyable outdoor activities of going swimming and going for a bike ride and taking a jog and put them together for one painful, punishing, and miserable event. That's a triathlon. And while I was not a great cyclist, I could certainly hop on a bike and pedal. And while I was not a great runner, I could certainly put one foot in front of the other and jog. So I did what any of you would have done. I took swim lessons. And I took a lot of swim lessons. I learned the overhand stroke, or the freestyle stroke, the most energy efficient stroke for swimming in open water. And I practiced and I practiced and I got in the pool every day and practiced until I could declare, yes, I can swim. It wasn't pretty and it wasn't fast, but I could do it. Because I want to let you in on a little secret as it relates to triathlons. And that's this. You can fake your way through most of a triathlon. You can fake your way through most of it. If you're having a tough time on the bicycle, just dial the gears back a little bit, put it into a low gear, or even coast if you have to. And if you're having a tough time on the run, then just slow it back down, put it back to a nice easy jog, or even a fast walk, which plenty of people do on a long distance race. But when it comes to the swim, you can't really fake it on the swim. You fake it on the swim, and you drown. And in the same way, you can't fake leadership. And CHC needs for you to be great leaders. That's why you've been brought in from all over the world to this Global Leaders Forum, because CHC needs for you to be great leaders, and you can't fake leadership. Great leaders set the pace. They establish culture. They bring people along with them. They lead change. And great leaders are visible, so you can't fake leadership. And leadership has a great number of important impacts for you, and I would submit to you that since you can't fake leadership, while there are many ways to go about leading, that the best way to lead is to be an inspiring leader. The best way to lead is to be an inspiring leader. Now you might be asking this question, you might be asking this question, if I can figure this part out, why inspiring leadership? Why inspiring leadership? And when I was writing the book, The Inspiring Leader, I had the chance to ask hundreds of thousands of people their opinions about tens of thousands of leaders that they reported to. And one of the questions that I had the chance to ask was, if your leader could do one thing differently that would have the greatest impact on you and your organization, what would it be? And the resounding answer was to be an inspiring leader. I've always said that if you want to ask how leaders ought to lead, then you ask those who are led. So hundreds of thousands of people responded, and the resounding answer was to be an inspiring leader. Secondly, we looked at the impact of inspiring leadership on a handful of business metrics, one most importantly of employee engagement. Now I know employee engagement is particularly important to you here at CHC, and we looked at all leadership competencies against the important metric of employee engagement and looked at the impact on employee engagement. And what we found was the one that had the greatest impact was the ability to inspire and motivate. And then finally, in that huge database of leaders that I talked about, we looked at the top 10% of leaders and compared them to the middle group and the worst groups. The top 10% versus the middle group and the bottom 10%. And the one item that was most present in the top leaders that was absent in the middle group and the bottom leaders was the ability to inspire and motivate. So, if you want to ask leaders how figure out how leaders ought to lead, ask those who are led. Number one answer was to inspire and motivate others. Greatest impact on employee engagement, and the number one marker for those groups that were in the top group versus the middle group and the bottom group. It was first among equals when it came to leadership competencies, and the most important leadership trait for those leaders who excel. So that being the case, I want to ask you a question, and I want you to talk about this at your tables. I want you to take a quick station break and answer the question, what does inspiring leadership mean to me? What does inspiring leadership mean to me? Take about 3 minutes and have that discussion at your table, and then I'll call on you for some answers. Okay. So the first volunteer will receive a copy of The Inspiring Leader. Right here, down at table 2. What was your answer? What does inspiring leadership mean to you?
We had vision, direction, connection, authenticity, genuinely cares, integrity, and a great smile.
Great smile. Wonderful. Wonderful. Remember the great smile part. So vision, integrity, there's a great laundry list there of what inspiring leadership means to you. Where else? Where else do we have answers? Over here.
Table 7 had passion, emotional investment, an aspirational outlook, competencies and traits that were attractive to the team that work for that person, that they would like to adopt themselves or develop themselves.
Yeah, fabulous.
Energy, clarity, and the ability to make other people successful.
Wonderful. The last part I want you all to remember, the ability to make others successful, a key trait for all inspiring leaders, but all of those wonderful characteristics. Let me have a last table as volunteers. Anyone? Do I see a hand? Over here. Table 8?
We had down that they know their people well enough to be a mentor and a coach and inspire them to go farther than they thought they could previously.
Right, so a mentor, a coach, and they push people to go further, bring people to go further than they originally thought they could. I want to share with you some other answers. I asked this question of thousands of folks. What does inspiring leadership mean to you? Here are some answers that I will typically hear. Inspiring leadership is about providing strategy and direction to achieve that high performance. I heard that in some of your answers. Here's another answer. It's about bringing out the best in others. You heard that through one of the table's answers where it said it's about bringing people along with them to do things that you didn't think that they could ordinarily. And then another answer about creating a culture that allows us to achieve our goals. And if I take those answers and combine them with the answers that you provided, the thoughtful answers that you provided, I can bring out essentially one common thread in all of them, and that is that inspiring leadership is about achieving results. Leadership is a means to an end. And inspiring leadership and all of the wonderful traits that you talked about are means to the end of bringing people along and achieving results that are greater than people could have thought ordinarily, about achieving some kind of results. And when you look at leadership, and particularly inspiring leadership, one of the things that's hard to do is to get a really hard measure for how leadership impacts any number of business results. So I want to share a couple of studies with you that we did as we were writing the book, The Inspiring Leader, one in particular on an item that's very important to you here at CHC, and that is the impact on employee engagement. Employee engagement is one of those critical metrics because it's the precursor for so many other things that make a difference for organizations. Employee engagement is the rootstock of so many other business results, from productivity to profitability to customer loyalty. And any number of other business results, be it aircraft availability, customer loyalty, employee engagement, you name it. The ability to inspire and motivate has a great impact on those. And I want to share with you one of the studies that we had done that involved tens of thousands of leaders. And on the horizontal axis, we measured leaders' ability to inspire and motivate. And we separated them into 5 groups: the bottom 10%, the top 10%, and the middle groups. And then on the vertical axis, one of the things we measured was the employee engagement percentile. And if you look at those graphs, what you find is that the better the leader, there is a lockstep correlation to better employee engagement, particularly when you reach the top quartile and the top 10% of the ability to inspire and motivate, you start to see a really impressive impact of employee engagement. Now I want to ask you a question. Think of a time, not now, but at another time in your career, that you worked for a lousy boss. Not now, another time in your career that you worked for a lousy boss. Okay, think about that time for a moment. And then you can shout out some of the answers. What was that experience like? Anybody? You could use the microphones or just shout out your answers. Demotivating. What was it? Fatiguing. What else? Frustrating. What other kinds of wonderful adjectives do you have for me? Painful. Painful. What was in the back of the room? Ethically challenging. So miserable. Pretty much summed up in a word, it was miserable. Now I want you to think of a time, now you can use present company, where you've worked for a great leader, an inspiring leader, someone in that top 10% of leaders. Think of that time. What's that experience like? Optimistic. What else over here? Pardon? Rewarding. What else? Supportive, energizing, motivating. If you think about the kind of results that were achieved by the groups in the 90th percentile for employee engagement versus those groups in the 9th percentile, I think you consider the amount of productivity those groups had, the level of engagement they had, the energy that they brought to work, what kind of customer loyalty they were able to produce. And if you think about that, all of those are impacted by your ability to inspire and motivate. The better you are at inspiring and motivating, the more engaged your people are. And since engagement is such a critical component of your success here at CHC, I would submit to you that this whole inspiring thing becomes pretty important. So one of the other questions I often get is, what about the direct line of sight between net income or profitability? So we did a study on that as well and looked at the impact of leadership effectiveness on net income. And along the horizontal axis, again, I'll share with you that we looked at leadership effectiveness and we separated into bottom 10%, top 10%, and the middle group. And then on the vertical axis, we looked at net income produced. Now this was done in a financial institution, in a Fortune 500 financial institution. And as you might expect, the bottom 10% of leaders performed worse than the other two groups. But just exactly how much worse they performed was shocking to even us, because what we found was that the bottom 10% of leaders were losing money for the organization to the tune of $1.2 million per branch managed. The middle group was doing considerably better at $2.5 million, but what was really surprising, what was really interesting, was the top 10% group. And that group was earning $4.5 million, nearly double the rest of the population. Poor leaders lose money, good leaders make money, extraordinary leaders double the money. So if you can focus on leadership ability as a means to driving profit and employee engagement, that's a pretty good recipe for success here at CHC. The real question then becomes, how do we behave like the leaders that are in that top 10%? What does that start to look like? And I've thought about that a lot and written a lot about that, and this notion of inspiring comes to mind. And it's one thing to just tell you, well, get in the top 10%, just go be inspiring. Yep. I've asked that question of thousands of people. What is it about those inspiring leaders? What do they do that makes them different? And one of the most common answers I get is, well, they have some sort of charisma about them. They have some sort of charisma, which I can accept, but it's not real useful. I mean, just go be charismatic. It's about as useful as just go be inspiring. In fact, it sort of reminds me of one of my favorite movies. Everybody know who the character on your right is? Yes, who is that? Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery. Austin Powers had something that made him special. Do you remember what it was? Mojo, right. He had his mojo. That's what made him inspiring. It made him special. It gave him his extra strength. What Dr. Evil, the character on your left, what Dr. Evil called the essence, the life force, what the French call a certain I don't know what. And it's one of those things that is really hard to get your arms around in terms of figuring out, how do I just go be inspiring? But I bet you have a sense for what it's like for leaders to be inspiring, because I bet you've been inspired before by somebody. So I want you to think about this at your tables. who inspired you and what did they do? I want you to take about 3 minutes, and we're going to have you have a discussion about who inspired you and what did they do. All right? What were some of the things that your leaders did to inspire you? Trust. That trust was probably two-way. They trusted you and you trusted them, probably reciprocal in nature. What else? Back here.
We discussed the fact that that you're valued by your boss, that he not only gives you just direction, but he allows you to do it in your own way, and that you don't have to be afraid if you do make a mistake, that it's a learning moment.
Yeah, so you felt valued by the leader, and you had flexibility to do things your way. Terrific. What else? What else? I had a chance to listen to a number of your discussions. Yes? They were personal. They knew you, took an interest in you as a human being, not just a job or a task or something that needed to be done. Great. What else?
They didn't waver from their convictions.
They didn't waver from their convictions. There's character and principle involved. Pardon?
No flip-flopping.
No flip-flopping.
The wind blowing.
Terrific. What else?
I think they give you the impetus to be the best that you can be, like you want to do well for them.
Yeah, they give you the impetus to be the best that you're able to be. You want to do well for them. They make you want to go the extra mile for them. And I had a chance to listen to a number of your conversations, and I heard a lot of different things. What was interesting to me in this effort to just be inspiring, not once did I hear, gave me a successory or a trinket. Not once did I hear something like that. Not once did I hear, read routinely from the book of positive quotations. It's your attitude, not your aptitude, that determines your altitude. Great. It gets me going for about 30 seconds. Not once did I hear you say they gave me a motivational speech that sounded like it was delivered by that guy. Now, some of you laugh when you see him. That's Steve Carell, and he plays the character Michael Scott on the American version of The Office. And many of you laugh when you see his face just because it feels eerily familiar, like you've seen this behavior somewhere before. The fact of the matter is that the comic strip artist, Scott Adams, has made a killing with the comic strip Dilbert, making fun of our misguided efforts for how to inspire and motivate others. I didn't hear any of these things when I listened to your conversation. So I want to share with you what the pragmatics of inspiring leadership are. What are the things that you can do practically, tactically, on a day-to-day basis? Not at 4:45 on Friday when you think, it's time to inspire someone before I leave for the week. But things that you can do every day. Things that are not just part of a checklist, but things that you can do every day that change the texture of your leadership ability. So I want to share with you some of the pragmatics of inspiring leaders. First off, inspiring leaders build hope, optimism, and they create a sense of confidence. You said that in a lot of your answers. Secondly, they influence the beliefs and assumptions of others. One of the things that they're able to do is they're able to influence those beliefs in a positive way towards some of the things that you had mentioned when you talked about those leaders who are in the 90th percentile. They enable others to perform at a high level. Some of you had said that when I asked you about people who inspired you. They helped me to perform at a high level. And then finally, they increase positive energy. They bring energy and passion and enthusiasm to the job. And as a result, they create a level of inspiration. So I want to share with you some of the specific behaviors that go along with inspiring leaders so that you can take one or two of them and integrate them into your leadership behavior when you leave this Global Leaders Forum. So number one, leaders walk their talk and they talk their walk. They are the exemplars of the behavior that you want in an organization, and they talk about it. It's one thing that we talk about a lot, that leaders have to walk the walk, but they also need to talk the walk. They need to be sharing with others and communicating with others what's important to the organization, what's valued in the organization, and why specific behaviors are important. So I want to share with you a little story about this being an exemplar and an avatar of the kind of behaviors that you want to see proliferate in an organization. Does anybody know where that is? It's Disney World. It's the Magic Kingdom. That's a little more specific there. It's the Magic Kingdom. I live in Tampa, Florida, about an hour and 15 minutes door to door to Disney. I have a 2-year-old and I have a 9-year-old. So I feel I spend an inordinate amount of time at Disney World as a result of that. And what's one of the things that people notice about Disney World, the Magic Kingdom, when they first arrive? What's one of the things that people notice about it?
Expensive.
It is expensive. I can attest to that. It's expensive. After you're over the sticker shock from Disney, what's the first thing that you notice about it? I heard it already. It's clean. I heard that. I heard it shouted over here. It's clean. It's immaculate. And part of the reason it's so clean is because there are hundreds of people doing that job. There's hundreds of people picking up the trash there. But it is also a value at Disney World, and it's a behavior that's role modeled, that it's everybody's job to keep the park clean. That it's everybody's job to keep the park clean. And one of the stories that they tell at Disney University to all of the cast members, you're not an employee at Disney, you're a cast member, one of the stories that they tell about Disney University is about that gentleman. That's Michael Eisner. That's the former chairman and CEO of Disney. And they tell a story of him walking through the park, escorting a group of investors, showing them where they're going to be making future improvements in the park. He's showing them about future investments that are going to be made, giving them a little bit of a tour, notices some trash on the floor, stops, picks up the trash, continues his discussion, walks to a trash can, and throws it away. A great example of both walking the walk and talking the walk, because they not only model that at Disney World as great role models and everybody's job to keep the park clean, but they talk about it. They talk that walk as well. And they tell that story throughout the organization because it's an important value that they role model. So that's one example. The second thing that great leaders do when they inspire and they motivate is that they not only think outside the box, they destroy the box. And they really focus on innovation. You've all heard the term thinking outside the box. I would encourage you that it's about destroying the box. I want to share with you my avatar for innovation. It's this gentleman. That's a fellow named Antanas Mokas. He's the former mayor of Bogota, Colombia. And I don't know how many of you have been to Bogota, Colombia, but they used to have tremendous traffic problems. Traffic problems including rampant jaywalking, motorists not stopping, lots of issues that related to traffic issues and incredible discourteous behavior. There was also incredibly high fatality rates when he took over as mayor. So what's a poor mayor to do? Antanas Mokas has all these problems. What's he to do? You know, more laws, stiffer fines, show gory movies like you used to have to watch in driver's ed. Was it Blood on the Highway and Red Asphalt? All the gory movies, or hire more policemen? No. That's not what Antanas Mokas did at all. He did something totally different. He did none of those things. He hired 420 mimes to mock people misbehaving. His contention was that Colombians were more concerned about being ridiculed by their peers than they were even their own safety. Now, this was a great innovation project because he didn't have 420 mimes in all of Bogota, Colombia. He started with, you could barely round up 20, but did rapid prototyping, measurements of success, broad implementation, and found that traffic fatalities reduced by over 50% as a result of that project. So he was a believer that people were more concerned with being ridiculed by others than even their own safety, and he was right about that. As an aside, great job creation for the mayor, right? 400 new jobs, or 420 new jobs. That's a great job, by the way, managing a division of mimes, right? No one to talk back to you. No one to talk back to you. So innovation and thinking outside the box and creating a culture where innovation thrives in every corner, and creative problem solving exists as part of the culture is one of the key things that inspires and motivates others. So another thing that's incredibly inspiring and motivating is the ability to share strategic perspective and strategic thinking. One of my mentors, a fellow named Neil Rackham, used to say that if words could sue for defamation of character, the word strategy would be first in court. Because a lot of people have different meanings for what strategy actually is and what it means. So for our purposes today, I'd offer you simply this, that strategy is about what, and tactics are about how. Strategy is about what, and tactics are about how. And one of the problems that I see a lot of leaders get wrapped up in is they forget to think about what needs to be done and why it needs to be done, and only focus on the nitty-gritty of the how. They continue to simply look down, nose to the grindstone about how something needs to be done, and too often forget about what needs to be done, or as importantly, why it needs to be done. And I had some time to think about this. When I was in Beijing about a year and a half ago, I was actually working with Pete's team out there, and as he mentioned earlier in the introduction, we spent a day on the Great Wall of China. So I had some time to think about strategy while we were walking the Great Wall of China, because when you're walking on the Great Wall of China, you see a lot of that. You see a lot of steps, and you see a lot of people's backs, and you spend a lot of time walking because you don't want to trip. And the steps aren't even, and there's a lot to focus on the Great Wall of China. It's not just like a set of staircases in your homes. Well, we spend a lot of time as leaders looking down when what we should be doing is lifting our head to the horizon, so that's what you want to be seeing. You want to see where you're going and why you're headed there. And too often, leaders spend their time focused looking downward only at the next step, instead of looking onto the horizon at where the organization is going and why you're doing things. And the real critical element here for you to think about is that there's a balance to be struck. There's a balance to be struck in both of those, and the proper amount of time looking down and thinking about the tactics and the day-to-day, as well as looking up on the horizon to see where you're going and why you're going there. So a little lesson on strategic thinking, which is also very inspiring and very impactful when you look at why people are inspired. In fact, some of your answers as to what inspired you were about vision and direction and focus. So the next thing I want to share with you is the importance of coaching and developing bench strength, the development of talent and the creation of bench strength. I had a chance to talk with a number of you in the audience about the future of CHC and what you saw for the future of CHC. And one of the answers that I frequently heard about was that there was confidence in the current leadership in the organization, but there was a concern about whether or not you were developing enough bench strength for the future of the organization, and developing enough bench strength that levels down in the organization, further down as you look to the different layers of leadership in your organization. Now, the best example that I have to share with you of this came from one of my clients. As Pete had mentioned, I worked with AT&T. And I worked with AT&T at a time when they were bringing together 4 Fortune 500 companies to form one Fortune 10 entity. And I had a chance to work with their senior officers as part of an integration project, and that session was kicked off by Randall Stevenson, their chairman and CEO. And Randall kicked off the session in really unique fashion. He shared a picture of what the senior officer retreat looked like in terms of the people in the organization just 5 years ago. And he shared that picture, and he did something with that picture. He whited out the faces of those who were no longer with the organization over the course of 5 years. And he asked the question, what are we doing to develop our next set of officers? But he went further. He whited out another set of faces to say, in 3 years, this is the group of people who will be eligible for retirement, and I'll account for some natural attrition. And he whited out the next group of faces, and he said, what are we doing to create the future of this organization and the jobs that will be vacated once those leaders move up? And in the same way, great leaders, inspiring leaders, coach and they develop talent for the future of an organization, because you're building the future of an organization when you coach and develop talent. One of the things that's so critical is that you build the future of your organization by building the layers beneath you and focusing on how do I ensure that their talent has a chance to shine in the organization. And some of the answers that I got from you when you were talking about what makes for great leadership, what makes for inspiring leadership, is this ability to coach, and they took an interest in you and developed you. So one of the last ones I want to share with you in terms of specific behaviors that leaders take when it's coming to inspiring and motivating others is the ability to make an emotional connection. I was really careful when I put this up here about making an emotional connection. I wrote an article for Harvard Business Review about a year ago, and the article was about making emotional connections, and I had to be really careful that I wasn't talking about being emotional or wild displays of emotion. That's not what I was talking about. I was talking about making a human connection. beyond a task, beyond an output, beyond a job that needed to be done, about making some personal connection. Because the news I have for you is that you are in the people business. You are in the relationship business. And it's important that you remember that you are in the relationship business. The content of your work is helicopters and aircraft availability and parts and logistics and all the things that go along with it. That's the content of your work. But all of that work is done through people. And it's important to make connections with those people. So when I was doing some research for the book, The Inspiring Leader, I researched hundreds of leaders and found what made them inspiring and the things that they did. And one of the things that I was really interested in was I found a leader named Andral Pearson, this gentleman, the late Andral Pearson. And I was particularly interested in his leadership style because Andral Pearson had a sterling resume when it came to business. He was twice the chairman of PepsiCo. He was a director at McKinsey. He taught at Harvard Business School, wrote many articles, and really had a sterling business career. And what was really interesting about his business career was that he twice graced the cover of Fortune magazine as one of America's toughest bosses. So you get in mind the kind of person that this is, right? One of America's toughest bosses. His leadership style was characterized by fear, surprise, a relentless focus on the numbers, just a brutal focus on the numbers, and being tough and brutally abrasive. Now, some of you might be asking the question, Scott, I thought you were talking about making emotional connections, not severing them. Well, what's interesting about Andrew Pearson was that he was routinely known for sending people out of his office in tears. There's a story that one time he had a group of marketers that prepared for an all-nighter for a meeting with him. And he walked into the meeting and within 5 minutes slammed down the slide deck and said a group of trained monkeys could have done a better job than this. So again, making emotional connections or severing them. What I was most interested in was the last 13 years of Andy Pearson's life. Because what happened was quite a transformation over the last 13 years of his life. During those last 13 years, he was invited to be the chairman of Tricon Foods. You would know that as Yum Brands, or more likely the combination of KFC, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut. What I used to call in college the 2 a.m. trifecta. And during that time frame, he was invited by his friend and colleague David Novak to be the chairman of Yum Brands, and he noticed David Novak doing some things that Andy Pearson thought were just totally foreign. He noticed David Novak talking with different layers of employees, many levels down from the organization, whereas Pearson was used to insulating himself with just 6 or 7 executives and interacting solely with them. He saw him celebrating successes with them. He saw them soliciting their opinions and their ideas and things that he thought were just totally foreign behaviors to him. But what was interesting was that he noticed the impact that those behaviors had on creativity, on innovation, on engagement, and on their willingness to go the extra mile and the esprit de corps for the organization. And as a result, Andy Pearson changed his definition of leadership, and he changed himself and his practices. He learned and is quoted as saying, "If only we could unleash the power of everyone in an organization instead of just a few, what we could accomplish and what kind of organization we'd be." As Fast Company wrote about in an interview with him, Pearson learned how the power of the human heart drives an organization's success one person at a time. And that kind of success can't be imposed from the top down. It has to be kindled with attention, awareness, and recognition and reward. Now, some of you might think, well, he got older, he became a grandpa, just became a nicer, kinder, gentler Andy Pearson. But I would submit to you that he learned the impact and saw the case for inspiring leadership, that he saw the difference that could make, and he learned an important lesson, and that is this, that logic will make people think, but it's emotion that will make them act. And he wanted to drive action. Logic will make people think, but it's emotion that will make them act. And Pearson learned that emotional connection and driving that kind of emotional connection could make a huge difference in his leadership and ultimately in the organization. The interesting thing about this emotional connection, and I was spending a fair bit of time on it because when we looked at all of the behaviors that inspiring leaders encompassed. This one had the greatest impact as to whether someone was inspiring or not. And what's interesting about this emotional connection is that it has a huge contagion effect, that your emotions are contagious. What I mean by that is that your emotional state has an impact and affects others. I want to share with you a graphic that was in the New York Times about 3 years ago. And in this graphic, I'm representing a social network. The circles represent women, the squares represent men. The lighter the color, the more positive the emotional state, the happier those people were. And the darker the color, the more negative their emotional state, the more negative and the more down kinds of emotions those people had. Now, what do you notice about this cluster diagram? What do you notice about it? Anybody? Somebody said it. The negative people are clustered together and the positive people are grouped together. What this article showed is that we have an impact on the emotional state of those around us. And in these 2,000 people that were analyzed, that emotional state was up to 3 degrees of separation. That meant that there were people who you weren't even coming into contact with that had an impact on your emotional state. Now, that was a social network. Let me ask you about this at work. In most of the cases, you are the bosses, you are the leaders of the organization. Is your emotional state and the contagion effect of your emotions, are they greater than other team members, significantly greater, or exponentially greater? So, show of hands for number 1. None. Show of hands for number 2. All right, some for that. And show of hands for number 3. Yeah, a vast majority voting for number 3. I have no further scientific evidence for you about the impact of the emotional state, but each of you knows intuitively, based on the impact that you have had and the impact that you've had on others, about the emotional contagion and the effect of others' emotions on you. So as leaders, we need to be particularly mindful of that. Now, I do a lot of executive coaching and a lot of leadership development work with organizations, and I'll go through a number of these and work with folks on developing these behaviors. And some of the things that I will hear is, Scott, I completely get this idea of being a role model and an exemplar. And I totally understand this breaking outside the box and destroying the box for innovation, and the difference between strategic thinking about what and tactical thinking about how. And I completely get these behaviors, and I can do a lot of these. But then I get to this emotional one, this making an emotional connection one, and it's just not me. It's not my style, not the way I do things. And my response to that is that is a really bad excuse. It's a really bad excuse because they're assuming in most cases that that emotional connection and that kind of emotional connection happens in only one way. And what I want to share with you is that there are actually 6 different ways, 6 different approaches to making an emotional connection. And I was very conscious about the use of the term approaches here because it implies an intentional and conscious effort towards a certain kind of behavior. It's an approach, an intentional and conscious effort towards a certain kind of behavior. The year after I co-authored The Inspiring Leader, I had a chance to be a co-author of another book called the ASTD Leadership Handbook. And that was along with Jim Collins and Patrick Lencioni and a handful of other thought leaders on the topic of all things leadership. And one of the things we found was that there were 6 ways that leaders could make an emotional connection. They are, as an enthusiast, pretty self-explanatory. We talked about passion and energy. As a visionary, having a clear vision of success and bringing people along with you. As what I'll call an enhancer, a more people-focused approach, more focused on one-on-one relationships. In a principled way, focusing on character and the essence of trust. As a driver, with a focus on results and driving for those kinds of results. And then finally, as an expert. 6 different approaches that leaders could take as they look to make an emotional connection. That this isn't something that's done in one way. That's not about personality or style. So whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, or whether you like to be with groups of people, or you'd rather be alone, or whatever your personality styles are, any number of these approaches could work for you, and I'll give you a more thorough look at each of these here in just a second. Number 1, as an enthusiast. These leaders show passion for the work. They bring energy and focus and excitement to the work, and they get commitment by getting people galvanized around a task. And this is tremendous when you talk about passion and having energy for results. I see a lot of that here at CHC when I talk with people, and these people are demonstrated by having high levels of vitality and passion and vigor. And this is a very powerful way to inspire and motivate. In fact, it's one of those things that is sort of classical inspiring behavior when you think about a halftime speech or a rousing sort of plea for energy and enthusiasm. And it's a great way for leaders to be inspiring and motivating. But it is just one way. So you might not be that way. There might be another approach that's more appropriate for you, that feels better for you. Another one might be a visionary approach. These leaders are able to create a vision of what success looks like in the future. They're able to paint a very vivid future of what the organization could look like, and they gain commitment by painting people into that picture and allowing them to see their role in that. So you may not have the passion and the energy of the enthusiast, but your focus may be on vision and the ability to look for unique and better ways to do things. One of the best examples I know of this is, regardless of your politics, John F. Kennedy in the early 1960s, when he declared that by the end of the decade, the United States would have a man on the moon. Now, if you've ever been to Kennedy Space Center, you know that, and you've seen the technology that astronauts were shot into outer space in, you know that this had nothing to do with technology and everything to do with vision. But that vision is able to galvanize people, and that galvanized an entire country around the vision for success. Another way that leaders can inspire and motivate and make that kind of emotional connection with others is through an enhancer approach. I use the term enhancer approach here really focused on the positive quality of relationships, more of that one-on-one kind of leader. So maybe the enthusiasm and ebullient personality isn't there, and maybe the vision isn't great, but these kind of leaders take a one-on-one interest in your career. They focus on developing relationships and are supportive in terms of the direction that you can go. There's a fellow named Dr. John Gottman who wrote a book called Why Marriages Succeed and Fail. I'm not about to dispense marital advice. But in the book, he highlighted that positive relationships have more positive interactions than negative interactions by a ratio of 5 to 1. Now that's in successful marriages. Shoot for 3 or 4 to 1 at work and you'll be fine. But the notion here is that the positive interactions far outweigh the negative interactions, and these leaders make great connections with people and are supportive of the people doing the job. The next one I want to share with you is a principled approach. We talked about the importance of trust and reciprocal trust, and these leaders create the kind of organization that is principled, with character and a focus on integrity. These are the kind of leaders that have the courage to stand up and say, this goes against the grain of our cultural values, or this is not in the best interest of our customers. And they have the courage to stand up for the ethics and integrity of what they are focused on. And I heard from a number of you when you talked about leaders who inspired you, who said specifically, I'm focused on that kind of character in a leader, that makes me want to follow someone. And then finally, I'll share with you the driver approach. Now, when I look at CHC and I see the focus on results and the intense focus on results with great urgency here, I see a lot of driver sort of focus. And drivers really understand the power of the old adage, nothing brings a team together like winning. And there's this intense focus on results, and they get teams committed by focusing on the achievement of those objectives and bringing people along, and people get excited about that. And those leaders are often characterized as achieving outcomes for the organization. Now, I'll pause here on the driver approach. Sometimes drivers can get a little bit of a bad rap. I coach a number of executives where I'll hear, well, you know, they're just a little too much of a driver sometimes. And my counsel on that is don't stop for a minute. Pedal to the floor, because there is nothing inherently wrong with the driver approach. What you might want to do is to add a little bit of enhancer to that, add a little more people focus, add a little more focus on principled approach, but add some of the other approaches. But the driver approach is incredibly successful, and it gets us excited because we want to be a part of that winning team. And then lastly, I'll share with you the power of being a technical expert. particularly in an organization like CHC that has so much technically focused business. If you think about leaders who have inspired you, who have been technical experts, who have had the kind of expertise where you've said, gosh, I'd really like to be like that person. I want to learn from them. And they bring to the team up-to-date information. They gain the kind of commitment because people trust in their opinions and they trust in their technical expertise to get the job done. And finally, they're described as skilled and knowledgeable and able to make the work happen. Those are the 6 different approaches to making an emotional connection. So when I hear from people, you know, I'm not really that way. It's not my style. I don't necessarily do things in that regard. What I often will say is you have 6 different ways and 6 different approaches that you can choose from. You ought to be able to find 1 or 2 of them that can fit with your personality and your natural proclivities that make you feel good about how you're behaving. So the last thing I want to share with you, the last point that I want to share with you, is that the great leaders are characterized not by the absence of weakness. Great leaders are not characterized by the absence of weakness. They're characterized by the presence of strength. None of us is perfect. We're all human. We all have our issues. So no leader is characterized by the absence of weakness. It is always about the presence of strength. And last year I wrote an article for Harvard Business Review called Making Yourself Indispensable. And in that article, I'm going to share with you the last chunk of data about strengths. And across the horizontal axis, we measured the number of profound strengths leaders had. How many profound strengths these leaders had. 0 through 5. And on the vertical axis, we measured where they fell in the percentile in that broad database of leaders. And what we found was that with 0 strengths, leaders were toward the bottom third of all leaders. But adding just 1 strength vaulted leaders toward the 64th percentile. Add 2 or 3, and you're in the top quartile. 4 or 5, and you're approaching the 90th percentile, top 10% of leaders. So the optimistic message in this for you is that you don't need to be great at everything that I just talked about. Pick 1, 2, 3, and enhance them and work on them as a means to grow yourself as a leader, and you can vault yourself toward the top 10% of all leaders. So it's an optimistic message. There are no perfect leaders. There is no bright line test that you can take that says this is the ideal leader. You're all human. You all have your rough spots. But great leaders are characterized by the presence of strength, not the absence of weakness. So as I close, I want you to take one last station break, and at your tables, I want you to discuss 2 things. Number 1, what idea made the biggest impact on you? And number 2, how might you use this idea back at work? So I'd like you to take about 3 or 4 minutes and have that discussion at your table groups. I'd love to hear from you on those answers. What made the biggest impact on you? And how might you use this idea back at work? Anybody? Over here. You can use the mic.
Yeah, there were 2, but I'll mention only one. The 6 approaches was one idea that made the biggest impact on me, specifically. And not only because I can find myself, but I also can have a very good discussion with my direct reports and others about where they fit, and have a discussion about that.
Terrific, terrific. So real clarity about where you fit in those and the ability to find 1 or 2 of those approaches that work for you. Great. What else? Who else? Anybody? Over here.
The imagery of the Great Wall of China and what we've got out of these couple of days, and setting the real clear strategy, but being able to prioritise each step at a time, so as we come to execute, we're aligned with the bigger picture as well. And so to be able to take that back and communicate, I think, is really useful.
So having strategic perspective and focusing on both the horizon line and where you're headed as much as the tactics for how you're getting there.
Absolutely.
Terrific. Over here.
Had two main points. One was the 5-to-1 ratio on positive interactions. If you're going to try and coach someone and correct someone, build an emotional relationship with, or impact with them, you're going to have 5 positive interactions for every one sort of negative driving kind of interaction. The other thing was that struck the group was the 6 ways that you could create that emotional connection, and that it's so varied that we could actually use that as a coaching tool, coaching even our subordinates and how they can be better leaders and more inspirational leaders.
Terrific. So 2 things, the 5-to-1 ratio of positive interactions to negative interactions. I noticed you said 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative driving interaction. You know, really, you may want 6 or 7 if it's one of those, but terrific. Thank you. Last one, back here.
You spurred a discussion about when you had the going up the steps and what you focus on and when you focus on, about the timing to focus on leadership and providing leadership and what that balance is. And we were talking about how the natural proclivity is when you're in a state of crisis to want to fix the business, not necessarily fix the people and the leadership and focus on those. But that really is the exact time in which you want to focus on the people and you want to focus on the leadership.
Terrific. So about strategic focus and when to focus on people. Not always the knee-jerk reaction to do it when you're in crisis mode, right? But that might be one of the best times to do it. I wanted to close by sharing with you what happened in the triathlon. Told you I did the triathlon, so I want to share what happened in that. So it's race day, and I'm excited because, as I said, I can declare, yes, I can swim. Not pretty, it's not fast, but I can crank out 1,500 meters in a pool, no problem. And we get to race day, so here we are, throngs of triathletes, clad in nothing but the finest of spandex attire. And we're all huddled, gathered at the beach's edge. Because in this particular race, it's a sprint from the beach into the water, and you run in the water until you dive forward until it gets deep enough to start your swim. And it's at this moment that I start to think, that's a little different than the pool. The gun goes off, and immediately the stampede of triathletes hurtles into the water, and there's arms and legs and splashing everywhere and feet and hands and everything. Let me show you a picture of the start of a triathlon. That's the start of a triathlon. It's like a human washing machine in there. You know, the sea was angry that day, my friends. So in a moment's notice, one very polite triathlete swims over the top of my head, knocks my goggles sideways, fills them with salt water. Suddenly I'm blind. Right as soon as that happens, another very polite triathlete kicks me in the side and knocks the wind out of me. I start to hyperventilate. So I'm hyperventilating, I'm blind, I can hardly see, and I'm in this. Not my vision of success. Not my strategy so far in the race. In fact, I start to really freak out, and my life starts to flash before my eyes. The next thing that flashes before my eyes is another triathlete running by me in the water. And I realize the race just started. So I stop, I let my legs drop, and I stand up in waist-high deep of water. I empty my goggles of salt water, I look off in the distance, and I see a lifeguard on the surfboard, and I shout to her, "I'm okay." And she shouts back to me, "I know." I take a couple of deep breaths, I get myself together, and I remember my cadence. Reach, pull, breathe, reach, pull, breathe. And I dive back in the water, and I reach, pull, breathe my way to shore, finish the swim, and ultimately complete the triathlon. Now here's the thing. Here's the thing. When you're back at work, when you're back in your offices and back in the bases, it's not going to be nice and calm to talk about leadership like it is in here. In fact, it's going to much more resemble the chaos of the start of a triathlon than the nice placid nature of a pool. See, it's one thing to talk about what you're going to do as leaders and to make those commitments in here. It's quite another to do them when you're back in your offices and back on the bases. So my admonition for you is to remember the things that you committed to in here, to focus on those simple strokes, your reach, pull, breathe, the simple things that you committed to, the things that I talked with you about in this particular discussion. And if you can do those things consistently, find a way to do those simple things. I say simple, but they're not easy. I coach a lot of executives who say, "You know what, Scott, a lot of this is common sense." To which I reply, "Yes, but it's not common practice. That's why we're here. Focus on those simple things, your simple strokes, and you'll find success no matter what environment you're in. Thank you.
You've been watching Scott Edinger deliver a customized keynote that is typical of his 35 appearances each year. For more information on his availability and customized programs, please contact Edinger Consulting Group at the information on your screen. Thanks for your interest and attention.